Welcome to the Community Forum. My name is John Guglieltino, and I'm your host. This evening we're changing gears and we're going to be talking about the real estate market. There are those that say we're still in the dumps, and then there are those that say we're flattening out, and there's all those people in between. So we've got a resident expert, John Chaporian, this evening. He's going to be talking to us about where he thinks we're going, and some of the good buys that are out there, and some of the caution signals. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Before we get into our informal chat, if you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this racket as opposed to
racket. What are you calling it a racket for?
You were, okay. How you got into this line of work, and a little bit about your background, your family, and all.
Happy to do that. 1981, I graduated from Binghamton University with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and took a job with IBM. I was with IBM for 12 years, mostly providing technical customer service support. Everybody knows what was going on in the early 90s with companies downsizing. That was our last recession. And I was in management at the time, disappointed with the direction my career was taking, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to bring my customer service experience, which is, I think, very valuable in any business, and I wanted to take it to real estate. I had enjoyed my experiences in real estate with the agents that I had worked with, and I thought I could be a good service. Well, not necessarily better. They were good, but a good service provider to my clients, and it's been an up and down ride. It started slow because I got into the business when we were in this type of a recession. Things got better, and the past few years things have been a little bit rocky, and there's all kinds of opinions all across the board as to where we are right now and where we're going. So,
but this is really part of the business cycle. So to sort of ease into it.
Exactly.
There's it depends on what market you're in, but there's like the economy might be booming, but there's some markets that are down. Depending on a commodity price or whatever. So real estate, if you look at it in terms of a commodity, in other words, it's got its lows. It's got its in-between times, and then it's got its highs. If the price gets too high, buyers naturally drop off.
Exactly. And that's essentially what happened. Is we couldn't sustain the type of growth that we were going through in the late 90s and the early 21st century. And you mentioned commodity, and I would want to point out to anybody who's listening is that yes, we're in a bit of a downturn, maybe we're flattening out, but you're not losing money on a commodity unless you're selling it. So if you're gainfully employed, if you're meeting your commitment on your home and you're putting money away for the future, then there's really no reason to be down and out and disappointed with the market.
It's only if you're forced to sell that you say, well, it's a tragedy or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, there are a lot of situations, because it is a tough market for sellers right now, where maybe you want to retire. Maybe it's that time of your life where you want to move to a warmer climate.
Or you've been downsized.
Right. Or the house is too big for you to take care of, and you'd rather have a smaller home, and it's a little more difficult to sell. And then you hear about even more horror stories where somebody has a job promotion available for them in Chicago, but they bought at the wrong time. Their company isn't offering them a buyout to pick up their home, and they really can't take this opportunity. So it's unfortunate that there are life experiences that people can't take advantage of right now because they can't sell their essentially most valuable asset. But in general, you don't have a problem if you don't have to sell.
Right.
Um,
And there's creative ways of going too.
exactly.
You know, I mean, there's such a thing as, well, you know, why don't you temporarily rent the place?
Exactly.
You know, because there's always people looking for rents. It's just, now, do you have to get the top rent? You know, if you've been good, you might be able to rent it for a little less and
the
wait a
rental
year or two.
market's, the rental market's been very good. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a lot of people, because they're skittish about their jobs, they're not sure they want to make an investment, or they just don't have the money to put down now. Banks' requirements have gotten a little bit over to a little more difficult from being too easy. Back when all you had to do was have a pulse to get a mortgage, the requirements were too lenient. Now maybe they're too strict, but someday within the next couple or 3 years, we're going to settle to that middle ground where people with good credit who have some savings will find it very easy to get a mortgage. And to some extent,
what was
you
the
can
norm?
now.
What was the norm years ago? You know, you put down 10% or 20%. If you put down 20%, you were golden. If you put 10%, you had to do the mortgage and PMI,
Yes,
primary mortgage insurance.
Generally, if you have less than 20% of a down payment, you
Right.
have PMI, which
Right.
is private mortgage insurance. So that's a separate.
Yeah, but
It's a separate.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a separate payment that you have to make because you don't have 20% down.
Right, and where it got ridiculous was when people were buying property with 1% and 2% down.
Well, I have to tell you, I did my share of transactions with no percent down, and because if you had good enough credit, the banks even mortgaged more than you were purchasing. So, for example, you didn't have the money for closing costs, and they would give you a 103% loan. So if you bought a house for $250,000, you could literally mortgage $257,500 because the market was appreciating so much, and banks were willing to give out these loans.
But I'm sure there's people out there that may be a little more on the conservative side and say, how's that possible? You're buying a place and give you a mortgage for 103%?
It's really incredible when we think back at what we did
was going
in the
on.
past.
Yeah.
And essentially our government decided that having a mortgage was a right instead of a privilege. I mean, we all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but a mortgage really should be...
Not life, liberty, and property.
Right. A mortgage should be something you've earned.
Right.
You have good credit. You pay your bills. You have put away money, so you have a down payment. And if you've done those two things with your life, and you're gainfully employed, and you have a history of employment, and that should be the criteria that gets you a mortgage. But essentially, our government decided that anyone could get a mortgage. And stated income. If you were a mortgage broker, I could walk into your office and say, hey, I make $100,000 a year, give me a mortgage. And you would say, okay, sign right here.
You got an affidavit?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, John, I don't mean to say you're a cheap guy, but if I asked you to borrow $100,000, you'd want to know a little bit about me before you lent me the money. So,
but that was those are boom times.
Yeah.
And now things are closer to norm, right?
Exactly.
Or is it actually tougher?
Well, things have gone
the other way,
to the other side.
Now it's 20% down, and
you better have 20% down if you want the best rate. You better have a pretty high FICO score. If you want the best rate, you better have a history of paying your bills
on time.
You better on time, and you better show gainful employment. And if you've switched jobs within the last few years, it better be the same industry.
Otherwise, it's a no-go.
Yeah. I mean, you smartly didn't invite a mortgage broker here today because you wanted to fire at me and let me take all the bullets. Yeah, I mean, now we have an FHA program which is actually a little bit more lenient. And with good payment history and 3.5% down, you can get an FHA loan. And the FHA loans, the government subsidized, and they are doing them.
Is that for people that are new, that haven't had a home?
First-time home buyers are taking advantage of them. But
Right.
you can get an FHA loan with 20% down. And the attractiveness of the FHA loan is the interest rate. You have to pay a little bit more up front, but you can funnel your upfront payment into the principal of the loan. And people are taking advantage of the FHA programs now. Now, back in the olden days, back in ancient times, like 10 years ago, an FHA loan carried with it very strict appraisal guidelines, and the appraiser actually did their own building inspection, and the house had to be completely brought up to code, and it was difficult back then. But they've relaxed those requirements a little bit. There's still, as you know, in the normal home process, your buyer makes an offer, you negotiate it, you do a building inspection, and then you may have to negotiate some items in the building inspection. Well, what people aren't used to is now you have the appraiser comes out, and he has to be an FHA appraiser, and he may come in and say, all right, well, you don't have a railing here to the outside door, and you have peeling paint on some of the windows. So it's something that sellers just have to get used to. It's a buyer's market right now. And
how long is a typical home? I guess it depends on the town too, but in the towns that you tend to work in, which are Richfield, Reading, and
Richfield, Reading, Danbury, Brookfield, Newtown, those. It's very hard to get a good grasp on market time because so many listing agreements expire and get relisted. But I would have to say that on average, homes are on the market for 7 to 8 months now.
Wow.
If they're priced well, the time is shorter. If they're not priced well, the time is longer. And you might see several realtors listing a home over the course of the home's time on the market. And it's unfortunate. I try to be as honest as possible when I'm assessing price. And, we compete for listings, and a lot of times the seller, especially in a market like this where every dollar counts, will go with the realtor that tells them that it's going to be the highest price. And often that's not the most accurate price. So that there are some challenges for sellers.
Is there any price range, let's say, moves faster? Would you say that a house that's $350 or less might move faster?
That's a good question because today, and I don't know if the audience knows, but we're taping on July 12th. So we've just had the expiration of the first-time homebuyer tax credit along with the normal seasonal slowdown. Mostly closings that are happening now are people who found their homes in April and May in the busiest times of real estate. We found this year, because of the first-time homebuyer tax credit programs that were instituted in 2009 and early 2010, that the lower end of the market has been the most active. So, say, in Danbury, Bethel, Newtown, Brookfield, under 350 has been the most active part of the market because that's where first-time home buyers would qualify for a loan in those price ranges. Now, what we had hoped was that those people who are selling homes in those ranges would be able to move up.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened as frequently, and I think a lot of those people...
Or lateral moves.
Yeah.
Or maybe
either lateral, moving to a rental, or retiring.
Yeah. Retiring.
And the dominoes didn't create a
multiplier effect.
A multiplier for the higher end of the market, and the higher end is very, very soft right now. And as you can imagine, in an era or a time when people are more concerned about their jobs than ever, and more companies downsizing than ever, the people who would be in those price ranges are being a little bit more cautious. And people are assessing their values more. I don't need a 4,000 square foot house. I could live in 3,000 square feet. I can make some adjustments. I can have kids share a bedroom or a bathroom and things like that. And people are making smart decisions based on the parameters that they're working with today. And it's refreshing.
Isn't there like the super range, you know, like the stratosphere homes that are in the million plus? Aren't they more price protected because people, if they really want a certain type of house with a certain type of pool and, you know, certain amenities, that they'll pay about that price? They may not super, you know, hyper bid it like they did in the past, but they'll pay about, right or wrong?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what you're insinuating, which may be correct, is that people with a lot of money will always have a lot of money, and the middle class is getting squeezed out. So we have a shrinking middle class. So let's say the median price home in say Danbury, which would be around $330,000. Between $330,000 and $350,000 probably. There are a lot of people that can afford that and less. And then there are a few people, given the right amenities, that could buy $1 million home. And then what we're finding is that $400,000 to $600,000 range.
The ones in between are languishing.
Yeah, they're languishing a little bit. So that's a very interesting question, and an interesting thing that we thought we might see over time as the rich get richer and the poor stay the same, or the median stays the same.
Yeah.
And what we've seen this year, thankfully, is more transactions. So more people are being able to move on with their life. But what we have seen with that is still a flattening and in some cases a lowering of prices in certain towns. So when you're having more transactions and the prices are still dropping, people are just being more realistic.
Yeah, so the government program didn't act as in the way of a multiplier. It may have gotten some of the people at the bottom moving along, but it didn't jumpstart.
There are many experts who think that the first-time homebuyer tax credit, as you call it, the government program, really masked some very serious problems that we have in the housing industry right now. And for all intents and purposes, the government wants the housing industry to be strong.
Right.
Because if the housing industry is strong, people like me are making money and spending it. Mortgage brokers are making money and spending it. There's insurance.
Right.
Okay, movers. It's a real domino effect in the economy when the housing market is strong.
And carpenters get busy, even if they're not building new, they're putting additions and doing work on alterations.
Exactly.
You know, so that all moves it along.
Right.
So it's definitely in the interest of anybody in the government to have things moving along.
So I can understand things like the first-time homebuyer tax credit, but on the flip side of that, if you have serious problems with supply and demand, you're injecting a false
sense of security.
A false market factor.
Expectation.
Yeah. And, you know, we really, I think as a country, and, you know, I don't want to make this a political forum, but we need to create jobs across the board. And I think if people were more confident with their employment position, then they would you would find the housing industry
I think that affects that middle class because they're so afraid. Am I going to get downsized next? Maybe the wife is out of work, maybe the husband's out of work, one's still working, but they're not moving because they can't afford to take a $100,000 hit or whatever.
Exactly.
So they're sitting there like chomping on their nails and hoping that things are going to turn around. So I understand exactly what you're saying.
And people look at the statistics and they say, all right, let's look at the average price range of everything that's sold in my town this year, and they look back at the history, and right now, if you looked at the average price range that's sold in a town, you would go back and say, that's what the price was between 2002 and 2003. So 7 years ago, we're at the same price on an average basis.
So the prices have dropped to, roughly to what was 7 years ago, roughly.
statistically.
Yeah.
And statistics can lie, because essentially, if most of your transactions are on the low end because of the first-time homebuyer tax credit,
Right.
you're going to get a false picture, really, of where the average is.
And then in the wealthier towns, you're going to have those $1 million sales that skew that to the upside also, because you might have smaller sales, larger sales, but nobody in the middle is moving, like you said, because they're the ones that are scared.
That's true,
class.
but if you want to use Ridgefield as an example, as of a couple of weeks ago, there was only one transaction over $1.5 million.
Oh.
So there's been very little movement.
They're not moving.
Now, what affects Ridgefield is the prices in towns like Wilton and New Canaan and Weston and Westport. Towns that are a little bit more convenient for commutes down county and into the city. So if those towns adjust their prices lower, and you could get a big home in a better location, you naturally would choose that over Ridgefield, and that puts more pressure on the higher end in Ridgefield. So yeah, I mean, Ridgefield, I would say this year has probably had the most dramatic price drop. They're still off 10 to 12% this year, while most of the towns, Danbury, Bethel, and North, the prices have been pretty flat this year. Okay, and those towns...
Flat's not all bad.
Flat is good after the last few years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. We're happy with flat.
You gotta thank your lucky stars it's not going down.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, like you said, you started off the show with the perfect comment. It's a business cycle.
Now, what is the normal business cycle of real estate? Isn't it about 7 years, 7 to 9 years, or does that vary depending on the cycle?
The real estate cycle is going to be very dependent on the economy and all of these other factors. I think what you might be referring to is most people, on average, people stay in their home 7 to 9 years. Now, what you might see now is that extending, because people aren't necessarily moving up right now, because they're a little bit concerned about their employment situation.
I just know, not to give my age out to, you know.
Everybody here knows you're 84. It's okay.
Okay, but I'm saying is if you go 76 to 83, 83 to 90, and then roughly another, if you put another 7 years, it roughly is in sync with the cycles.
That's true. 83 to 87 was probably one of the largest growth periods in real estate. I missed that time. And I bought just after that, when it was at its peak. So I've seen the downtime. I've personally seen my house go down in value, and then I've seen it double after that.
And then roughly from 95, 96, you had another 7 years on the downside. Then you had another boom up until 2 years ago.
Yeah, the counterpoint to that is, roughly prices stabilized in 94 and 95. But I think you saw the growth period go more than 7 years, and the reason the growth period went more than 7 years is because our government injected an economic factor of everybody getting a mortgage into creating more demand. So whenever you create more demand into an economic cycle, you're going to extend the growth period. Now what we're experiencing right now is an oversupply or a drop in demand, and you know what that does to the supply and demand curves. It drops prices. So you know, my advice to people is, if you need to move on, get an accurate estimate of what your house is worth and be prepared for that. And if you're not ready to move, don't. And
you got to also know where you're going, what that's going to cost.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
You know, and don't overstraddle either, right?
No.
In other words, you're going to Chicago. Make sure you don't buy before you.
Well, that's very true. I remember when I moved up here. To be honest with you, I took out a bridge loan on my house. And so I closed on my house before my condo was sold down in White Plains. And you would never hear of something like that happening today.
No, because
I had mechanics and Farmers Savings Bank over on Route 7, and they were happy to give me a bridge loan.
Yeah.
And there was a title issue with my condo sale, so I had the bridge loan for 2 more months and all that interest on top of everything else, but it was no big deal to the banks.
But life was good, so...
Life was good. Life is still good. You count your blessings, John.
It depends, you know.
I get to sit here with you for half an hour. I'm counting my blessings. Okay, no, but you're absolutely right. But yes, that one cycle did expand because we created, our government created more demand for housing, and that gave everybody the opportunity to let the dominoes ripple. And now, now if we're in this for 7 years, I think we'll be doing okay, because I'm still very concerned about the job situation in our country. We were a manufacturing and service country, and we've lost a lot of those jobs.
Man, a lot of those manufacturing jobs aren't coming back. They're all in China now.
Yeah.
So, what do we do for Encore?
Yeah, I just read a long article on one of the publications. I don't know how I have time to read these publications, but China's in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
China's housing market is about to tank, and they're using our banks as a model for what kind of requirements they need to put on buyers now. So you know they're really in trouble if they're using us as a model. But let's talk about something positive.
Yeah.
Interest rates are incredible. Historically, you could never get a mortgage for 4 5/8.
Well, back in 1960, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to check my. That's right around the time I was born. So I wasn't qualifying for a mortgage then. But yeah, I mean 4 5/8. I mean, if you're a buyer and you're paying rent, and you have an opportunity where the selection has never been better because there's more supply than demand, and you can get a mortgage for 4 5/8. I mean, this is a good time to buy. It's a good time to call up your friend and say, who's your realtor? Is he good? Hook me up, and let's start looking around.
Yeah.
So let's look at the positive things too, because we're going to come out of this.
Yeah.
You think it's 3 years? I wrote that down on my crystal ball. And
Okay.
I'm going to tell everybody in 3 years we'll be out of this. But just imagine. I mean, if you're a buyer starting out, if you're gainfully employed.
Do you have a website where you have some maybe basic information that you could,
Sure, actually, my name's going to appear on the screen eventually, and it's very easy, johnchaporianhomes.com.
Okay.
And you can get a lot of information there on mortgage qualification. You could email me.
They're sort of waving to me. We got like 20 seconds left.
20 seconds?
So
that went really fast.
So I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in to the Community Forum. Tune in next week, same time, same station, and we'll have another interesting program at that time. Good night for now, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.